Sorry.
No, I've had it off. I'm
Okay.
Good evening, and welcome to Nox Mente. Gosh, I could screw this up anymore, I would. Tonight's guest is Varla Ventura. Varla Ventura is a scholar, poet, provocateur, and lover of all things odd, unusual, and truly freaky. She's the author of Sheroes, the Book of the Bizarre, Wild Women Talk About Love, and a host of other tomes related to the strange and bizarre. Her favorite holiday is Halloween, and loves to talk about love. She lives in San Francisco, California, and we're welcoming her to the show. Welcome.
Welcome, Varla.
Thank you very much. That's actually an old bio.
Yeah, I realized that when I swiped it off Amazon.
I should have sent you the new one.
You can add to it right now. Bring us into.
Go for it.
Well, I no longer live in San Francisco. I actually live in Minnesota, just outside of St. Paul, where it is very cold.
Yes.
And since that bio, I've written several books, including the book Fairies, Pukas, and Changelings, which I don't think was on that, and the most recent one, Paranormal Parlor, which will come into play tonight.
Excellent.
Those were included in the other tomes.
Of course.
Yeah, I was just going. I lived in St. Paul for years.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I'm from that area. So
I didn't know that. No,
yes.
And where do you live now?
I am in Washington State in the Gorge area.
Oh, pretty.
Which
Very
I can't
pretty.
get away from. I love it so much. The mountains out here, it feels like we're in Romania or Hungary.
Oh, it's gorgeous. I love that.
Hungary.
I lived for a time in the Pacific Northwest when I kind of in my early 20s, and I loved it.
It does appeal to us kind of spookier people.
If you don't mind the those days where it never actually gets above like median gray.
Yes. It's most of the year.
Then you can appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, I find the weather is very British Isles here. This seems like, longer periods of gray. Summers are, we do get clear summers, usually at least a month. So.
Yeah, well, living in San Francisco, I had friends that would friends that lived in Scotland, and they would always want to meet in like Southern California because they were like, they didn't want to come to San Francisco because the weather was too similar. So
yeah.
they
need some vitamin D.
Yeah.
Yep. Wow, I'm so thrilled to have you on, Varla. I just think you're perfect for this, and just all the stuff you do and represent. It's a great honor. Not to be all fangirly on you, but I am a bit. So,
well, thank you. That's very flattering.
Let's jump in. Give us an idea about earliest memories that you can recall right now of stuff that affected you, your world, pop culture. Did you have a relationship with nature? Just the early stuff.
Well, actually, one of my earliest memories is a lucid dreaming memory.
Oh.
And I actually I think this might be the conversation that sparked the invitation to this show, because that is kind of your main topic.
Probably, I have no recollection of that entire interview. So.
Really?
Really?
Well, partway into it, you chatted me and said, "Hey, I do a show. It's just about dreams," because dreams came up. So I remember it.
You totally triggered me then.
So anyway, it's true. One of my earliest memories is, of course, I didn't know at the time what it was, but it's a lucid dreaming memory. And I had to have been between 3 and 4 years old, and I was having a recurring nightmare. And I had this nightmare several nights in a row. Um, and I'd wake up crying. My mom would come in my room, ask me what was wrong. And finally, I kind of described this nightmare to her and told her this nightmare. And the nightmare was, a 4-year-old's nightmare. I was running through a field and I fell into a pit, and I couldn't get out. And that was the nightmare. So my mom, in her wisdom, said, "Okay, I want you." She didn't say there's no such thing as, there's no meadow, there's no pit. It's all in your imagination. She said, "Okay, I want you to fall back asleep. I want you to go back to that meadow. I want you to run through that field. I want you to fall in that pit. And then I want you to see." At the time, we had a Great Dane, and I was 4 years old. So the Great Dane was like a horse. And she said, his name was Kind Sir. And she said, "Kind Sir is going to drop a rope down to you, and he is going to pull you out of that pit, and then you can continue running through the field." And I did exactly that. And that is exactly what happened. And I never had the nightmare again. And that I have never forgotten. And, we remember snippets. I think some of us do remember snippets from when we're very young, flashes of color or images. But that is something that I specifically remember because I had had that nightmare, and because I was instantly empowered to overcome it in a way that made perfect sense. And I think that actually unlocked something in me, and the power to be able to have those lucid dreams naturally, which I think that, people study and practice and try to get to the place where they can have lucid dreams. And because of that experience, I believe it's primarily because of that experience and my mom's handling of it, that I developed a natural ability to lucid dream, and still lucid dream to this day. So
There's so many things that are fascinating about this. How old do you think you were?
I was between 3 and 4, because I remember that it was before we lived in this particular town outside of the Bay Area, and we moved up into the California foothills when I was 6.5, 6. And so I know that it was prior to that. And then I just kind of know from where my bed was in the memory, because the room got moved around when I was a little bit older. So I think I was between probably 3 and 4.
Wow. This is what's really great about this is it's so early with this high lucidity and then the reoccurrence aspect. But what the cherry here is that your mother's great advice here, and the fact that your Great Dane, Kind Sir, from your waking life is part of it.
Yeah, well, it made sense, right? And I think that there were many times that I would wake up and I would have, is there something at the foot of my bed? Or I would have had probably a paranormal experience. And I was never made to feel like I was making things up, or I was not dismissed. Those fears were not dismissed, or those queries or questioning was never dismissed. And so I think because of that, it became such a natural part of my life. So it was absolutely an early influence on, who I kind of grew up to be. I wouldn't exactly say I'm not grown up, but
Are any of us? This is a
let's
great
hope
gift
not.
from your mother, though. That's great parenting. Seriously.
Yeah, yeah, and it's I continue. I have a son myself now, and we talk about what did you dream, and he does not have recurring nightmares, but we do talk about dreams and what do you remember what you dreamed? Because often I ask somebody what they dreamed and they don't remember, and I don't probably remember every single detail from every single night, but it's rare that I don't have any memory of what I dreamed the night before.
Mhm.
So it's always kind of interesting. It's just, it's one of those table topics as over breakfast, what did you dream last night? And
Yeah. It's always been that way for me in my life. Of course, we're doing this show. subject. I've loved it my entire life, so it's definitely a table topic, and I find it brings together interesting people as well, don't you? That
Oh
are
yeah.
willing to go there and talk about their dreams openly.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, everybody dreams.
Yes.
They dream differently, or they have different relationships with their dreams, but it's, it's a biological function of our brain to dream, right? So it's one shared
Maybe,
experience.
maybe not.
It might
Yeah,
not
there's
be.
so many theories. What okay, so back here in the early days, so I get you're from San Francisco, the Bay Area,
Mhm. Yep.
and I think that's my first and so that I live there, so I know that there's a connection. For me, there's always a great connection to nature, especially the water.
Oh yeah.
And
The
then
sea.
when you get out in the hills, yeah. Did you have a good connection with nature as a young person?
I definitely did. I had I mean, to this day, I still can smell the wild fennel and the
Yes.
eucalyptus in the San Bruno Mountains. And there were these particular caterpillars that always appear on those fennel plants. Um, I would say I had a healthy relationship with nature. We had a garden and things like that. But when I was, as I'd mentioned before, when I was 6.5, we moved to a completely rural community, completely off grid, totally no running water, no electricity, still is off grid. My
Oh,
parents
wow.
still live there. It's still off grid. They've resisted um, PG&E for
Mhm.
many years.
Good on them.
And so that was quite a transformation, because this is an area where, to me, it was incredible. I didn't think, oh, we're leaving behind. I was just like so enchanted by the forest. And where we lived, it was this kind of rough piece of property, but it had 100-year-old apple orchard on it.
Oh.
And some of the apple trees had grown over, sort of grown over each other. And so there was basically like apple wood forts that you could climb in. And I spent many, many hours just imagining things and walking the stream. My mother had two geese that used to walk with her and follow her around the property. And she would always say, "Oh, that's the fairy stream." And then, she taught us about fairy rings, which are the
Mhm.
mushroom rings. And that's where I, also learned some of the warnings, like not to fall asleep on the fairy mound, not to eat
Mhm.
these things. And I also kind of started developing more of a relationship with plants and herbs and herbal medicine and things like that. We weren't studying it, but it was a natural part of our environment. So you would eat the manzanita berries, and you knew that these berries were safe, and this plant you picked and it helped your cough. And when the next door neighbor was pregnant, we gathered raspberry leaf tea for her and gave it to her as a gift. So these were little things that we did that kind of influenced. It's like learning a language when you're young. You just naturally know it as
Yes.
you grow up. And I think that that is true for, the language of dreams, but also just sort of that relationship with magic and medicine. For me, those things were always very connected, and the natural
Yeah.
world and medicine.
Yes. Oh, I agree. It's all this is such an idyllic bringing upbringing, and at least for people like us, uh, it's a gift. It's a gift, especially the off-grid thing. That's amazing. On that note, were you raised, it sounds very witchy. Were you raised witchy? Was there religion around you?
I would say I was raised pretty damn witchy. um,
Cackling. I'm gonna leave now.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, my father is a Southern man. He's from Texas, and so he's definitely more of a just sort of conservative atheist, really. Not a
Mhm.
conservative in terms of political affiliation, but probably a little more emotionally conservative compared to, any given witch you would meet.
Yeah.
And my
Yeah.
mom, she is born and raised in San Francisco. So she's
A hippie.
absolutely well, one time I remember being about probably 10 years old or something and asked her if she was a hippie. And she said, I had 3 kids in the 60s. So I was a secretary. I didn't have time to be a hippie.
Yes.
I would have
Yeah.
loved to have been a
Right.
hippie. That's what she told me. I would have loved to have been a hippie, but there just wasn't time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. I know
But
people
definitely
that say
open.
that.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely open. And, she still is very interested in the psychic arts. My baby, we all, each of her children had baby books where you put your first little lock of hair, and in the beginning of each one of ours is our horoscope. So she
Oh,
did
I
our
love
charts, and these are things that are so pretty normal. Grew up reading tarot cards, a lot of Dion Fortune, and
Yes.
a little bit of Aleister Crowley on the shelves. Very Sybil Leek actually was a
Yes.
huge influence on my mom, and someone that I totally, when I read her work, completely gravitated toward and understood where she was coming from, and just the way that she positioned things and her idea of witchcraft and what that
Yes.
was.
Sybil was awesome.
Just a very sort of like instinctive, natural, old ways that don't have to be, I don't want to say ritualized, but they don't have to be, I guess,
Formalized.
formalized. Yeah, it doesn't need to be formal. It needs to be a little more instinctual. And so I think that's definitely, because my mom has had and has friends that she would perform rituals with and such, but she never was really part of like a formal coven. Or I mean, we always had witchy things around, little witch figurines, and it's like we liked that stuff, but it
Mhm.
wasn't that she walked around saying, I'm a witch and look out. I do remember several times her getting very angry at like my sister's boyfriends, my older sister's boyfriends, and I remember one time them getting in a fight, and my older sister saying that my mom had put like a curse on her husband. Which, well, might have.
The power of fear compels. It really does. That it's This is just wonderful. I love hearing all this. I'm so not surprised to hear any of this though. It's great. Okay, so in that early phase back there, was there anything, so in the poppy culture world, I'm assuming this might be before you went off grid, like cartoons,
Oh yeah. So actually, we had a TV when we lived in the city, and then we had a TV again several years later. But there was definitely a period of time where we did not have, and we did a lot of reading. We read all the Grimm's fairy tales and things like that.
yes.
And to me, I mean, I love that stuff. Grimm's fairy tales by Kerosene Lamp. If you haven't read Grimm's
Yes.
fairy tales by Kerosene Lamp, with nothing between you and the woods but a thin plywood wall, then you really haven't lived, right?
Totally.
But pop culture wise, I would say, well, I will tell you something. I saw The Shining when I was probably about 4 years old. It was the early days of HBO. It was had just become a thing where people could have HBO, and there was the big box that went on top of your television, and it had the buttons that you pressed for
Yes.
the 6 different channels, and one of them was HBO. And they had, they would show movies, and The Shining was on. And I don't think I watched it from beginning to end. It probably wouldn't have held my attention. But I definitely, remember some of the scenes, which of course later when I was a teenager, I watched it, 10 more times. But the funniest thing that I remember is that I don't think we were like propped up in front of the television watching it. I think it was on and my parents were watching it, and my sister and I were probably coloring or, something. But it was on, and I remember, staring at the screen and seeing that whole scene where the elevators pop open and the blood
Yes.
comes rushing in, and and being totally freaked out by the twins. And my sister and I are actually very, close in age. And I have several sisters, as you've garnered from my um, referencing. But I have one sister that's extremely close. We're less than a year apart. And so we always kind of look like twins. And so there were these like creepy twin girls in the movie, right? But the scene that was the most influential, and I don't know if I've ever even told my mom this, but it's the scene where Jack goes into the room and there's a beautiful woman in the bathtub.
Yes.
And he goes up to her and, she's naked and he starts to make out with her. And my mom covered my eyes during that scene, not during the buckets of blood gushing. She covered my eyes during that scene, but she didn't do a good job, right? She did that covering the eyes where you can totally see through them. And it was just enough for me, I could see through them just in time to see this woman transform into this totally freaky, cackling old lady whose skin is kind of rotting off in the bathtub. And that was kind of traumatizing. It wasn't the naked lady and even like the blood and stuff, but and the fact that my eyes were covered, which made me, of course, instantly more interested.
Yeah.
I was like, what was this? But I'm trying to think of cartoons. What kind of cartoons did we watch? I mean, certainly there was, I remember watching, gosh, I feel like I just watched like Captain Kangaroo and Sesame Street and stuff like that when I was a kid. And then we had our like period of no television time. And I just want to clarify, it wasn't like my parents were like, all right, we're gonna, go live off the land. And they were kind of wanted to get away from the man. That was definitely part of it.
Yeah.
But they were a little bit more just like, there's just a little more redneck to it than hippie, I think, in many ways. So there was some roughing it for sure. There were years when we didn't have water or indoor plumbing. And but then when we got back on TV, I think like I was probably, already probably too old to be watching Saturday morning cartoons, but I was a huge Pee Wee Herman fan.
Oh, love Pee Wee.
And by that time I had a younger brother, so I kind of, Smurfs. We watched a lot of Smurfs.
Yes.
And anything that was kind of like, little world and fairy-ish like that. Like I think there was like a spin-off of Gummy Bears was, like it was based on the candy and that would come on after Smurfs and stuff like that. Yeah, definitely. I would say I'm heavily influenced by Smurfs at a certain point in my life.
Well, and they're fascinating. I just went back and revisited how fascinating they are. They're very fey in the wood and all that.
And Gargamel the alchemist, who's
yes,
the evil guy with the cat trying to turn them into gold, and yeah,
there's so much juiciness there. How many siblings do you have?
I have 5 siblings.
Oh, a pinnacle! There you go.
And we're all fairly spread out in age. I have 3 siblings who are, maybe I think the oldest is 15 years older than me, and then 14, 13. Then there's an age gap, and then there's my sister and I, and then our younger brother. So it's 2 boys on either end. The boys are about 20 years apart almost, and then 4 girls in the middle. So lots of sisters, which is totally awesome.
And very witchy too.
Super fun. And brothers. Brothers are also totally. And my brothers are both very psychic. They're very different from each other. One is much more sort of conventionally religious, and the other is far more of an outlaw. But they both have a lot of psychic intuition. In fact, I would say that my youngest brother is probably the most psychic of any of us. Since he was a kid, he would predict, what color car was going to come. We used to do that with him. It's like, what's the next car? I mean, also, right, country bumpkin kids is like, what color do you think the next car is going to be? So he would always get it right.
Is he still like this?
Oh yeah, still you can think things, and there's a lot of things you don't have to say, and yet he knows. And it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's great.
Do you
That's
know what
really, really
sign he
beneficial.
is?
Yeah, he's a Gemini.
Oh, okay, that
Both my
Mercury.
brothers are Geminis, so they have a lot of like strong. Um, yeah, there's just a lot of psychic intuition there.
Yeah, that is Mercury. What
Mhm.
about you? What sign are you?
I'm a sign of the witch.
Which one's that? Because when I think Black Moon Lilith, and particularly in the third house.
um, yeah, my birthday's in October.
Oh, okay, I got you. So that's
Scorpio.
Libra or Scorpio.
Yeah, I'm right on the cusp,
You're on the cusp.
kind of.
I'm not
You're not a
surprised. Though.
Scorpio?
No, I am, but I'm
Okay.
on the cusp of Libra.
You scream Scorpio to me, so.
Oh, very sensing that.
Oh, that's going to be
still
our
in
band name, the
October-
Screaming Scorpios.
Oh my God, I love that. I love that. I hear stinging too. The stinging Scorpios. This is great. Okay, and so in this early period when you're having so you come in, you're having lucid dreams and all that. What did in that period, if it's changed, what did the dream landscape look like and feel like for you as a very young person?
Um, I would say I had very few nightmares when I think back. I think I had a lot of the nightmares that I had were often associated with illness. And so I still occasionally have those. It's not a specific event. It's sort of like a feeling and an impression in a dream. For example, I had chicken pox, but I actually got it twice.
Oh,
Who
So
gets
did
it
I.
twice?
I did.
You did?
Yes.
Okay, I got it twice, and my
that's
sister also
strange.
got it twice. And the second time, it was far more severe, and I got high fever, and I got scarring from it, and I was out of school for like, I think a month and a half. It was really, and everybody said, you can't get chicken pox twice. I was like, well, I did, and I got the scars to prove it.
If the first one didn't take.
Yeah, the first one didn't take. So hopefully you can't get it a third time because, But I remember having this nightmare that was associated probably with the high fever. And it was just sort of this metallic, rolling, sort of almost like a rolling wave, sort of this like pressure. And this just really kind of almost the way you feel when you get an electric shock, but not the shock part, the like kind of feeling in your head after of just like that. I don't know, it's not quite an EBGB, but like just like everything's been interrupted.
Mm-hmm.
And so every once in a while, I will have that feeling again in a dream. And then there were a couple times that my nightmares were often associated with electricity. And maybe I was just absorbing some of the horrors my dad saw because he worked for PG&E. And then he wanted to get out of let's get off the grid. We don't want to be on that grid anymore. It's like, what did you see down in those tunnels?
Oh my, I want a whole show on that.
Right?
Wait a minute.
That
Now,
sounds like a Lovecraft story.
So I've heard people talking about
PG&E,
possibly the fires were started by underground tunnels of PG&E where they're doing weird shit.
Oh, I have just heard that PG&E is getting sued because faulty wiring triggered this massive, the campfire.
Allegedly faulty.
Yeah, I mean, could be some kind of
Paranormal
that's funny.
thing.
I actually have been listening to this totally weird podcast called The Walk. And it's really cool. It's kind of like it's like an interactive thing where you're walking around and basically this explosion happens in this train station. And then you get sucked into this like semi-post-apocalyptic scenario in Scotland, which is totally cool.
Ooh,
and
yes.
it makes you kind of, I don't want to give it away because it kind of, the story unfolds, but you're kind of getting directions the whole time. And it's not like a fitness thing where they're like, okay, now run for 30 seconds. Cause I've done those actually, like the zombie 5K apps and stuff. It's like, all right, nothing's going to work unless I'm like, think that something is actually, chasing, something undead is chasing me. That's the kind of fitness I can get behind.
Yeah.
Or get ahead of, I should say.
Ta-da.
But anyway, I guess, so I had a couple of nightmares that were, sort of electrocution. And those were often set in the Bay Area around like electrical towers.
Mhm.
And it was usually, something, actually the one that's the most vivid was something had happened to my sister. Like she fell into this electrocuted water and I saw her skeleton, and we were little, we were children.
Like
So
in a cartoon, you saw it? Like
How old were you?
I probably first had that. It was probably after we moved. So I was probably 6 or 7 when I first had that. But I will tell you, to this day, when I drive by those towers, I it makes me feel sick. And I think it's just the association with this dream that I had. But apart from a few kind of key nightmares that came up, I would say my dreamscape was largely, in kind of vast and infinite in that childlike fantasy way. There were castles, there were houses I regularly visited. There were not a lot of people. I didn't have a lot of recurring, not a recurring cast of characters necessarily. That didn't really start happening until my grandparents passed away. And when my grandparents passed away, I started regularly dreaming about them and having conversations with them and visits with them. And that has happened with other people that have passed away. And I think when I was younger, that didn't really happen because I didn't know too many people who had died to converse with.
How old were you when your grandparents passed?
I was in my 20s, my early 20s.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get into all that later, but that is just stuff I love. Um, okay, so this earlier stage with these, it sounds like you have a lot of recurring dreams, by the way. Is this
I do. I have I guess I should just be clear that, because I feel like there are people that have recurring dreams that are identical. And so
Mhm.
they are like recurring repeat dreams. And
Yeah.
apart from the one that I told you about, in which I
Yes.
first learned to lucid dream, my recurring dreams, the things that are recurring are the places that I go,
Yes.
and the feelings of the dream, and sort of the backdrop and the landscape, and sometimes the scenarios. But it's not I've never actually had the same dream twice since that time.
Yes. So that was the only time you had like facsimile type where it's
Yes, yeah,
exactly.
that I can recall. Yeah, that's the only time where like the exact same thing kept happening. Um, so
So after Kind Sir saved, you got through that with Kind Sir. I love that as a name, by the way, for especially a Great Dane.
right, he was very
Did
kind.
did you dream with him at all after that?
I don't remember that him being in my dreams after that. Not. I mean, he may have been, but I don't remember that being significant. Like he didn't stay in my dreams. Um, Yeah, not so much. I mean, he was around in waking life, but I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
continue to dream with him in it. So he wasn't. I don't think he was. I mean, I really think he was sent to protect me, because that's what he did in daily life. You know.
I've got stuff going on out here. Do you all hear it? We
Yeah.
talk about Kind Sir and the alarm's called. My wolves are going to start howling. They do. They love
but you're not living until you hear the cat play the piano.
Yeah, I have a cat and I have wolves. Uh, so all right, let's move into. So I have all this kind of marked, and we've got an idea of where you're coming from and all that. So let's jump forward into, say, the part where your 20s, when your grandparents pass, and then you start having these types of dreams with the dead.
Yeah.
Is there so with the with the grandparents in particular, was that the gateway into all of a sudden having these encounters with people you had known?
I think it's it's mostly them. I do occasionally see people that have passed away that I have known since, but it's few and far between. The but first my first my grandfather died, and then my grandmother died a few years later. And during that time, she actually had dementia,
Mhm.
and I spent a lot of time with her, because now I was an adult, but at that point, she's still kind of, she had known me mostly as a child. And so I spent a lot of time with her, and had some really interesting conversations with her, in her demented state. And so I felt, I think I was very close to her, but I almost immediately started dreaming about my grandfather after he passed away. Um, that was a time for me that I think, it, it was, your 20s are always so, there's a lot of black and white stuff happening. They're so
Mhm.
extreme and everything feels so extreme. And I think around that same time, I also like witnessed my first birth, the birth of my nephew.
Mm.
Where I mean, I had three other nieces and nephews by then, but this was the first time I had been in a room with a baby being born. Even my younger brother, we weren't there because we were, I guess, not back then. You couldn't siblings couldn't be in the children couldn't be in the labor and delivery room. I guess they probably still can't. I don't know. Um, but anyway, so I think that I had and then I was beside at my grandmother's bedside when she passed away. And so there was the rhythmic cycle of birth
Mhm.
and the heavy breathing and the watching the clock and the waiting.
Mhm.
And then there was the reverse, which was the heavy rhythmic breathing and the watching the clock and the waiting. And in both cases, you're holding a hand. In both cases, you're beside the bed. And so I think during that time, I got, I think that's when I started realizing that I knew how to lucid dream, and that I knew like that's probably the period of time in which I started reading more books about dreaming, witchcraft, the occult, apart from things that I had been exposed to as a child, like actively seeking those things as an adult. And over again, I kept finding themes of things that I either disagreed with, or I had already experienced or already had on hand. So I found that that's when I sort of started recognizing and rediscovering the natural instincts and abilities that I was gifted with via my mom, the psychic abilities, the ability to read tarot cards, and to know what to put into a spell when you want a certain outcome, and
Mhm.
things like that. Not that I don't think that, obviously I think books are valuable and that you need, I'm a big reference person. I have a lot of reference books, especially on plants and herbs and things like that. But I think that that's a time when I started recognizing that I could actually use these skills to help me figure out, what I wanted to do with my life and what the next trajectory was, and all that kind of stuff. And I met this really interesting person who worked at the Psychic Eye, was the occult shop
I
in.
know it. Yeah,
You remember the
Mary.
Psychic Eye? Yeah.
It's she's still there, right?
Well, the Psychic Eye in San Francisco closed down, but I think
She's still in LA.
there was still one in Las Vegas for a number of years. It was sort of like the first psychic franchise. I think there were two or three of them around the country. It wasn't like a huge franchise, but they did readings. You could go and you could buy all the stuff you needed. You could buy, your penis candle, and you could buy your,
Yes.
the bags of sage, and you could buy
Yes.
whatever you needed. And It was great. And at that time, actually, in San Francisco, like imagine the landscape of San Francisco. It was pre.com. So there
Yes.
wasn't this crazy spike of rents and money. Nobody was using the internet. Like a couple people had cell phones. I had a pager and a landline, you know.
Well, pagers were monumental. You were all of a sudden connected.
I was like, okay, let me see if I can scrounge up, 50, whatever, a quarter to make the phone call because I got paged by somebody and I'm going to call them and get the message or whatever. I remember going outside of like clubs and trying to like hear in a payphone. It was like, what's that message? Where am I
Oh,
supposed to
girl, you're giving me the memories too.
go? Right. So the psychic guy, you could go in there and you could, buy your ingredients. And I became friends with this man named Jack, who was from New Orleans. And he had a lot of intrinsic psychic ability. And he was very, he was used to giving classes and lessons, stuff like that. And he said, I'll tell you one thing if you really want to, we were just talking about these kinds of things all the time. It was so nice to have somebody to converse with about this topic. And he said, if you really want to heighten, if you feel like you're on the precipice and you want to really heighten your psychic abilities, you've got to, not turn on the television, don't answer the phone, don't read the newspaper. He's like, obviously you have to go to and from work. But if you really want to connect with your instinct and your psychic abilities, then you need to cut all of these outside influences off. And I have lost touch with him over the years, but it would have been so interesting to get his take on, today's phase where
Since it's all there.
It's almost,
It's
the
too much
opposite in many ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I forget what you even asked me about. I got down the slope, started memory lane.
Well, that's all right, and that's how we do. And I remember where we were going. I have a sidetrack note just because I lived in San Francisco for a few years in the 80s. And I was wondering if you remember Curios and Candles.
Oh, yes.
That was one of my favorites. And then Uma's.
Oh, my God. I was going to ask you if you ever went to Uma's on Page.
I loved Uma so
Uma's
much.
Tools and Magic.
Tools and Magic.
Taught me how to tie a witch's knot.
Yes.
I bought something there and she said, I'm going to show you how to tie a knot that will never come undone, but that you will always be able to pull apart. And I was like, sounds good to me. So I just call it the witch's knot. I love that place. I actually, when I went and traveled and I came back, I had been gone for about 8 months and I came back to San Francisco and the first place I went was to Uma's Tools and Magic. And she had just put a note up on her door that said that, after so many years we're closing, and that was about 2000.
Yes, I had heard that. I actually lamented. I haven't been back to San Francisco.
I still lament that place. And I would walk by it and it became like an architect firm or something. I would walk by it and I would be like, nope, that was Uma's Tools and Magic.
It's always going to be that. Her oils were still to this day.
Oh, yeah. She had great oils, didn't she?
Yes, they were and she only did those planetary ones, but they're her special blends.
Yes.
And she did, she mixed them and would make stuff, but she was always like, let's just use, what do you want?
Yes. And she would make them up for you right there.
Yeah.
And she, the only place, and I believe it is still there. This is just, I've only been away about 4 years now, but is the Sword and the Sword and the Rose.
Oh, yes.
That place?
Yes, I do.
You have to walk through a hidden garden to get there. And they still mix the oils and they have all your basic occult needs. But it's those kinds of shops are
rare.
Few and far between. Yeah.
These are the pinnacle of occult shops. When I try to describe these to people in today's world, because you go into these occult shops now and they're so new agey. They're just, you don't have a real.
These ones are dark. The air is thick with the smell of Nag Champa.
Yes.
There's somebody in the corner with a meditation bowl and a old, scarf spread over a table, and they're reading tarot cards quietly.
Real Victorian furniture.
Revealing some deep secret of whatever querent is there, which you can hear every bit of.
Yes,
And there's
yes,
iron cauldrons that you have to not trip over, and
yes,
shiny candles and things hanging from the
yes,
ceiling, and it's always dark,
yes.
nice and dark.
So, and that's what I grew up on, and it's so disappointing for me now. Whenever I go in, I have that standard.
Yeah. Well, The Sword in the Rose still maintains that standard, and actually, I have been told that in the area where I grew up, there's a shop that opened called the Cult of Gemini, and it's in
Oh,
Grass Valley,
I
California,
like that name.
and that is supposed to be very au- authentico, very it's supposed to be a real occult shop where you
Old
can get
style, yeah.
so the difference, I guess, is that there are still stores where you can buy things like magical items and get your tarot cards read, and you can buy tarot cards and you can buy books. But these were the places where you bought all the things to put together yourself into a spell. This is where you bought the
Yes,
core things you needed for the ritual. This is where you
absolutely.
bought your cup and your cauldron and all those kinds of the bell book and candle stores.
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
again, that's another, I
Now it
have
makes me wanna open one up just for
Varla, I want
fun.
it's my goal to do it because you know the reference now, and since I just think everywhere you go, it would just eaten up wherever one would open up because it's lacking. They're lacking that feeling, that vibe. So, all right, let's get back to the okay. So we were talking about the grandparents, and so your grandfather passed first. Did you have an awareness that he was passing before he passed, say maybe through the dream or even just your innate psychic ability, or did it come on you as more of a surprise?
I did not have a dream, but I did have a feeling. Um, and I was actually living in the Pacific Northwest at the time, and he was in San Francisco, or he was in California, and my cousin came to the door. Oh, my cousin I had a cousin that lived across the river, and she'd never come to my house before. I was like, well, what? I mean, and I woke up that day actually with this feeling that I was in a not great situation. Just, I will spare you the details, but it was not a great environment. There was a lot of just there were a lot of drugs around, a lot of strange people that were, kind of not trustworthy. Things were always going missing, and creepy older dudes were always hanging around, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
And so I woke up that day with this feeling of like I need to get out of here. Not like a panic, but like this is absolutely not an okay environment anymore. And I need to make sure that I have everything I need to be able to leave here in a day. And I thought to myself, what if something happens, with my grandparents? And so
Mm.
I managed to, kind of get what I needed into a bag. And then my cousin came by that afternoon, and she was like, "What are you doing?" And I said, I didn't say trying to get the hell out of here, but that's, essentially what I was doing. And she said, I brought you this hat. And I was like, well, that's a weird thing to say. And really, she was there to tell me that my grandfather passed away, but she was so heartbroken over it. She couldn't tell me.
Wow.
And I left that day with the bag that I had packed. So I don't know if that was psychic intuition or desperation or just divine timing. Um,
Yes.
I think if it was divine timing, I probably would have gotten out of there a few weeks before. But
But it's hard to overlook
it's
the
hard to know.
synchronicity of it all.
Yeah, so I
That's the thing.
definitely, but he did not come to me in a dream that night. The interesting thing to me is that quite a bit of time. So I was one of the youngest of his grandchildren. So when I met him, he was an old man already. He was an old retired man. Wonderful, wonderful man. And I was close with him in that we shared love. I mean, he was wonderful. He was cuddly. He was kind, and he adored us. But I wasn't close with him in a way that, you know, I had long conversations. I was a kid. So I kind of take it as a real gift that I still get to sort of converse with him, and I still get to see him once in a while and, you know, get some kind of, I guess it's not, I don't know if it's so much guidance as it is just a comfort.
Hmm.
Although he has appeared at significant times, as has my grandmother, as has my brother-in-law.
Mm.
They have appeared at significant times, and my brother-in-law has come to me with specific messages. So, and that's only happened a couple times. And
We'll get
there's a,
into him. We'll get into that in a minute.
yeah,
So with your grandfather, after he passed, what was the time period between your grandfather going and your grandmother?
I think it was like 4 years maybe.
So that's pretty significant. When he first showed up in the dreamscape for you, do you recall that dream?
Yes. I don't recall all of it, and I don't recall, you know, it's like I don't remember really the beginning or the end. Um, but I do remember seeing him, and this is kind of where the lucid dream thing comes in. Now, if I remember it correctly, I think we were in a church, which is the last place I saw him because you know, saw him at
Yes.
his funeral.
Right.
So I remember being in a church and him, I think he was standing there and he was trying to tell me something, and he had his little, you know, like red cardigan on. And one other detail about my grandparents that I didn't mention is that they were both deaf. My grandfather was a deaf mute, and my grandmother was lost her hearing when she was 10, so she was deaf, extremely hard of hearing, but she could speak and read lips. So when they, you know, when they're communicating with me in dreams, it's not like they're telling me sentences. And my grandfather in particular, because he was a deaf mute, he didn't speak a lot. So it's not like suddenly he came into my dream and he's talking. He's
Hmm.
not talking, but he's talking. He's talking in sign, but mostly it's like he's just communicating with me and telling me something. And I think in that first one, it was a very simple, it's it's all right. I'm all right. And it was incredibly comforting. And the other thing that I always have in the dreams with both my grandparents is smell. I can completely smell what they smelled like. You know, people have that significant smell.
Yes.
And so I always can, you know, smell them. And it's a great, you know, it's great. I wake up so happy when I've had like I call them grampy dreams. Like if I have a grampy or a grandma dream, I'm just so happy because I feel like I actually got to visit with them. That's how it feels. It doesn't
Yes.
feel like I'm tracking it and keeping, you know, I probably should keep better track of it, but it's not always that I'm getting a specific message like you must turn back or you're doing, you know, that's a warning or anything like that. It's more of a, although I'm sure there are patterns to when they come and visit, but it's more of a just a it's normal. It's like a normal, hey, we're just hanging out kind of feeling. And
Hmm.
it's for, you know, however long it happens. Most of the time, I walk into a place and they are there. So in that first dream, I walked into the church and my grandpa was there. Frequently, I will walk into a house, my own house, a childhood home, a
Hmm.
home that I frequently visit during dreams. That's just this, you know, kind of house in the desert that I just end up at.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's, you know, it's all different locations, and they'll be in that house. It's always in a house, actually. It's always. And occasionally, I think my grandmother's been in a garden a couple times, but it's always in a house, and they're already there. And I know they're there usually before I see them, and I'm kind of looking for them. It's like, oh,
Ah.
they're in, oh, grandma's in that, the dining room, something like that.
Do they appear as they did when they were older? Has their age changed at all?
They appear as they did when they were older, which is the time they appear to me and the way that I remember them the most.
Yes.
And, my grandfather was, I guess, 68 years older than me. So,
Yeah.
he appears to me as a 70 to 75-year-old, maybe an 80-year-old man,
Yeah.
frequently, sometimes a bit younger.
But it's still attached to how you knew him in waking life.
Yes, absolutely. It's attached to how I knew him in waking life and what I associate with him.
So with your grandmother, when you first experienced her, also the same question with your grandfather, was there any precog to it, or was it after the first? So were you able to sense that she was going, and this is, it's an interesting question with older people because we kind of expect that it's not far, it's not like a younger
Oh,
person.
yeah. Oh, you mean when she died?
Yeah.
I knew the exact second she died.
Oh. Oh, tell us that, please, if you will.
Well, I had been by her bedside and, she had uh, repeatedly stopped. I mentioned that she had dementia and she had repeatedly stopped eating.
Yes.
It was something that it was one of the remaining things that she could control. And there had been great discussion among the siblings, her children, my aunt and my mom especially, over what to do. How many times are we going to hospitalize her and rehydrate her? How many times are we going to do this? And to their credit, they really took everything into account, and I think very much set aside their own sorrows and their own desire to have their mom with them for the rest of eternity,
Yeah.
and let her go when she wanted to go. And so there was a bit of preparation that we knew about. So it was like, okay, grandmother she's dehydrated again. We've given her some IV fluids, but we're not going to put her in the hospital. And I think my aunt had just said, if you want to come, now would be the time. And I did. And, I sat with her and told her that I loved her and held her hand and sat beside her bed and listened to the cycle of her breathing.
Mhm.
Um, and then I, I could have stayed, but my uncle came and I just felt that it was such an intimate moment. I chose to leave and let her, her three children just, her three living children just be there with her. I just felt like that was the right thing to do. So driving home, I was I had been home, I guess, the rest of the evening, and I believe it was the next morning, and I had started a shift at the grocery store where I worked as a cashier. And I suddenly stopped. Luckily, there was no one in my line. I stopped and I just burst into tears.
Mm.
And about, I guess, 5 minutes later, my shift manager came over and said, Penny, take this. There's a phone call for you. And it
Mm.
was my sister, who had also been at the house with me, calling to tell me that she had just gotten a phone call and my grandmother had passed away. And I said, "Did they tell you what time it was?" And when she told me the time, was the exact time that I
Mm.
completely
Chills.
I just knew it. I was probably closer with my grandmother, and I think the fact that I was so connected with her and I spent more time with her as an adult, um, so I think I was more aware of her presence, and we knew it was coming.
Yes, of course.
But, you don't know the exact moment except for that you do, and I did. And, and then, I think that was a significant event as much as the, early lucid dreaming, because, when things like that happen, you get those inklings all the time. Oh, well, that's what I suspected. Or, you think about a friend and they call you.
Hmm.
And, or I would pull out, I have a beautiful scarf that I do my tarot cards on, and I have two different scarves, and one belongs to a friend who is living, and one belongs to a friend who has passed. And every time I pull that living one out, which is not that frequently, I get, I think, oh, I wonder how my friend's doing, and she'll contact me in some way within a few hours of that, typically. And it's not somebody I talk to every day. So I think, you get those kind of like little psychic hits, but when something like that happens, when you definitively know that something is happening at that moment, and then it's validated and explained, that can be a real turning point for you in terms of being able to trust your instincts and your own kind of cognition with that type of thing.
Which is a big deal for a lot of people. I less so for people like us that kind of grew up with backgrounds, is we actually have very similar backgrounds. Um, it's still something where these events that you align with, if you acknowledge them, you see how clear the communication is, how really utterly clear it is, the synchronicity of it.
Absolutely. And I think around that time, somebody gave me The Secret Language of Signs.
Yes.
And that book really spoke to me. It really was just so plainly, the first half of the book is just talking about signs that we see in every day, and signs that we sort of create ourselves, that are indicating things that are going on in our lives or in our subconscious, or maybe, in um that are connected to us somehow, and it can be a way to sort of guide us. And I never forget, one of the examples she gave was that if somebody is always saying, oh, it's a pain in my neck, oh man, that guy is a pain in my neck, man. And there, it might actually be an indication that they are having neck problems,
Hmm.
and they're kind of saying this phrase over and over. That is, it's a sign, it's a signal. And so I started really, trying to read those kind of signs with just things that were happening in my life, just trying to figure out, this was before I had written any books. And I had always wanted to be a writer and had been writing for years, but had nothing published. And it was just, one of the things that kind of got me to realize that I could actually do something that I'd always wanted to do if I just followed, the breadcrumbs properly.
Absolutely. It's you sum that up so well. Uh, with your grandmother, the first time you saw, what was her first name? So we just call her by name.
Victoria.
So when you saw Victoria in the dream the very first time, what was that like?
Awesome.
I imagine.
It was awesome. And it was totally conscious. It was totally like, but you're dead and you're here. This is so great. And there was sort of this unspoken understanding that this was how I would see her from now on.
Hmm.
And there have been a few times where I have tried to invoke her in some way. What would grandma do? Or what, as I lay down that night, I think, okay, am I, maybe tonight would be a good night to have a dream with my grandma in it. It I, I can lucid dream, but I can't like pre-plan my dreams like that. So that doesn't always work. That doesn't always work out. But she does come frequently. And the first time, it's one of those things that I feel like she just has always kind of been around. It just made me not miss her. It made me not miss that gap between when she was alive and when she wasn't And then when she was dead, it was like, but she's still here. She's exactly the same. She's in these dreams. And it was just a great comfort. And I think, again, it was just a house kind of situation where I went into a place and she was there. And she said something to me, something not really significant or poignant, something very like, oh, it's over there, or something like that.
Hmm.
And I was so incredibly happy to see her that I almost embarrassed her, which is totally how she would have reacted in real life. Well, it was like, it's just a dream. I think she's, kind of said to me, like, it's just a dream. I was like, but you're here. This is amazing. We can hang out. We can hang out whenever we want. But it's not really like that. I don't really get to choose when I see her. I just get to know that I'm seeing her and experience it, and then wake up with that wonderful wash of uh, um, her love and that comfort.
I completely understand. I live for those
Oh,
very
they're the
well.
best.
They are. Has it been it so with your grant with Victoria and her husband, has it have you seen them together? Is it like he's in the house or she'll be in the garden, or
Yeah, all combination.
yeah.
Most often it's just one or the other, but it, I've had all combinations. I've had the two of them together. I've had them both, their presence both known in the dream, but one of them is in the other room and you have to walk
Mhm.
into that room to see them, and one directs you to the other one. I've had dreams where it's just, just grandma or just grandpa. And then, so sort of all of those combinations have happened.
I love this. This is the death part, especially with Victoria, as you were talking about, it just gave me the chills, in a good way. These things that remind us the process. What you were saying earlier, which vibes with me so heavily, is it's how similar birth and death are. The process of birthing and deathing. They're almost the same thing.
Yes, and they're often, in the same places.
Yes. Yeah, so that's something I've been onto, rabbit hole with for a very long time. It's so connected. I wanted to so there's a lot of other details I want to get into, but I want to jump into your brother-in-law stuff that we put on the shelf for a minute. That I have the question mark here. This seemed like it was going to be really significant.
Yes. Well, my brother-in-law died very young. He died of a very rare heart condition. He was 48 years old. And before he died, I saw him in the hospital, and he, when no one else was in the room, I believe my sister had gone down the hall. He told me that, he said, yesterday I saw this light shining down. And when the
Mm,
light got closer, I realized that it was millions of tiny little beings, like little angels. And it was felt really good, but I said, I am not ready. And he said, please, please look after your sister for me. And, when people are that sick, or it was so rare, no one really knew what was happening, so it was sudden but also confusing. And so you're not going, most of the time you're not going to say, hey, I know you're dying, tell me your dying wish.
yeah,
Or you don't know that you're
yeah,
never going to see that person alive again. You don't know that when the last time you see them. It's pretty rare. I knew that with my grandmother, but there's still this little part of you where you're like, oh yeah,
yeah.
maybe
It
something,
is rare.
maybe. But he had told me that, and I just listened, and I think, he told me that because he knew that I was open to that sort of thing. And then, I think he died the next day or like 2 days later. I don't remember exactly what, if it was, it was one of those, he was just in the hospital over this short period of time. And not long after he died, he came to me in a dream, and I was actually out of town. I had just found out that I was pregnant,
Oh, wow.
and I was in Seattle
Oh,
for a esoteric conference
oh,
in a hotel by myself, and it was pouring rain, and I had this dream, and in this dream, he said a couple of different things, which I don't always do this, but I woke up and I wrote them down. And I wish that I had that. I don't know which notebook it's in. I probably have 100 journals on my shelf with scrawled little notes.
yeah. Yes.
So I'll give you the gist. But the gist was just that he had told me some information about he asked after my sister, and he gave me a warning about somebody who was in our family who, it was my his daughter's husband, and he gave me a warning about her, and he told me a couple of other things.
Hmm.
And it was not like when I saw my grandparents. When I saw my grandparents, each time that I saw them, they they maybe had something to say, maybe not a lot. There was no desperation to it. This was like there was a certain element of desperation, and that he was trying to convey a lot of information in a short period of time. It's like he knew we only had 10 minutes in this dream or 2 minutes in this dream. And he told me all this stuff. And then I woke up in this funky little hotel room by the Space Needle, and I grabbed my journal and I wrote down everything that I could remember, because I knew that I would fall back asleep and wake up and I would have forgotten what he said and what the specific message was.
Hmm.
Um, and some of it actually, I don't want to get into like too much stuff about what the warning was or anything, but some of it was very prophetic. And
What was the conference?
it was the Esoteric Book Conference.
Okay.
Oh, the
The
EBC.
last,
So that's
the one where
modern. Yeah.
the most recent one, or
No, this
okay.
was the first one.
Oh wow.
I believe it
We
was
must
either the
have.
first or the second one. So this would
Yeah.
have been in 2010 or 2000.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right
Yeah.
in there.
Do you remember when they had that music exhibit in the Space Needle?
I did not go into the Space Needle, but it might have been at that same time. I didn't.
No, this was like 2003.
Uh,
I had a panic attack in
no.
there. It was pretty creepy.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never been up in the Space Needle.
I wasn't up in it. I was on the ground floor.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. I was inside a giant shoe. It's a story for another day.
A giant shoe.
It's a giant
Okay.
platform shoe. It was a
Like a Jimi Hendrix exhibit or something?
not Hendrix. It was can't think of his name right now.
Prince?
No, older guy.
Oh, who else wore platform shoes?
Eddie Murphy did the hot tub joke on him. Hot tub. I'm getting in a hot tub.
James Brown.
Not James Brown. Thank you, James Brown.
Yeah,
It was a James Brown exhibit, and it was a giant
Oh.
platform shoe, and you get inside, and it was like a little video in the round, I guess, in the shoe.
Oh. And you had you had a claustrophobia type panic attack? I would probably have a panic attack if I was inside a giant shoe.
Well, it's a longer. There's a longer story. That was like the culmination of all of them that I had that week.
Oh no!
Yeah, we were doing some sales pitch to Microsoft, and I had to go up to Redmond. It's a long story. It's not my show. I'll shut up.
It is
interesting.
Your show too, Jerry.
No, I mean, it's not about me.
Right. I get you there.
Well, now people have to tune in next week to hear the story of Jerry and his shoe.
No, but if people want to hear it, I will tell it on Cruising with Steak on Tuesday night.
Yeah, respond via Twitter and tell us if you want to hear it.
I'll tell it on my Tuesday night podcast.
Okay, there we go. You got a little teaser now.
So he died while you were at the EBC?
No, he had died just before then.
Okay. And I have a couple questions on this. So the light that was shining down that he said had billions of beings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was he seeing it from the ceiling?
Well, he was in a hospital bed, so yeah.
Okay. because my mother also, it was a constant thing with her at the very end where she kept talking at this ring on the ceiling, and it was millions of beings,
Oh,
and it was
really?
all light. Yeah. And I find that significant. I haven't heard another person really say that. The fact that the light was millions of beings, and she kept saying it's a circle.
So he didn't mention the circle, but he definitely indicated that it came down from above and that it was a bright light. And then when he looked at it closer, he saw like all these he called them angels. Um, but he also referred to them as like little beings. And I had never heard him say anything like that in my life.
Hmm.
And I don't, in fact, when he told me that, it didn't even occur to me until a couple of weeks later what he had said to me. I mean, I remembered what he said, but all of the series of events took place,
Hmm.
including him dying. That all these other things are. And then I found out I was pregnant, and then I had to go to the thinking conference, and the conference was awesome, but
Yeah. Yes.
not really in the jovial, let's go out and have esoteric drinks mood.
Yeah.
But
But
so that, but that is, yeah, that's it's interesting that you said that your mom said that. He wasn't a person that talked about that kind of stuff a lot, and I don't know if he. And in fact, at one point I asked my sister, but she didn't remember him saying anything like that to her. So I would have to ask her again. I don't know that he ever said anything quite like that to her. Um, but he
was he
said
that
to me,
kind of, so he wasn't that kind of person though in general? This was unusual.
I mean, he was raised Catholic, so I think he believed in um he believed in things. He believed
Yeah,
in
the angelic order.
angels, and yeah, and he believed in God and light and things like that. So I wouldn't say he wasn't a spiritual person, but he certainly wasn't a you know, it never came up in conversation.
Yeah.
His beliefs never came up in conversation
Yeah, so he wasn't real
with
preachy
me.
in life. Yeah.
No, not at all.
That I find it very significant with my mom. Yeah, it was that she was like your mom. I mean, you're describing it to be almost like, so she was a spiritual and witchy. So she just said they were millions of beings. It was coming down, and she said she wasn't ready and was
That's
trying.
like the same story. That's
It,
crazy.
and this is 20 years ago. So
Wow.
there's a these are the threads, Varla. I've been looking, like, you look for, right, when you're investigating things. It's very interesting. Very. So in when you encounter him, have you encountered him in dreams after the warning type communication?
One time.
And how did that one run?
That was a bit more casual. That was a
Well,
bit It was just a bit more like, "Oh, hey, I haven't seen you in so long." Like, it wasn't like a "how you're doing," but it was just, that was more of a peaceful kind of the way that I felt when I saw my grandparents most of the time. That was more of just like, "Oh, I get to see you. This is so
oh,
awesome."
yeah,
And
yes.
it was actually when I think it was probably like after I had moved to Minnesota, so it was probably 3 years ago, I had that dream, another dream where he was in it, and it was more of, a comforting dream. And that time, and this doesn't happen to me very often, but that time I woke up and I cried because I was so relieved to see him and
Hmm.
so happy to have been able to just be around him. You people in your life, you take them for granted, especially, your in-laws, and people who are just always around you, your siblings, they're always around you growing up. So you kind of take them for granted. And then I feel that, this was just really special just to be able to say, oh, you took the time out to, come and hang out with me for a few minutes and let me know that things are good.
Yes. This for me has been the hardest part of death. I've been through a lot of death from early on, and it's the void they leave in your waking life. So it's those, especially those that are closer in, that the void's bigger if you spend a lot of time with them. It's more the void because I do have general contact with people in dreams, and so the missing part, like, I feel like we go on, and I feel like we don't die. You can't kill energy. And so it's just that physical void. I cannot call you up. I can call you up in dreams, but I don't have the luxury of just saying, like 2 days or yesterday, I just wanted to talk to my mom. There's a bunch of stuff going on in my life. I want to talk to my mom. And it's like, oh man, I don't have the outlet. So that is the thing that is hard, dealing with death, as opposed to, say, the birth side, because they're here on this. So in this section, cannot fast. I think I want to get into a little bit of some of the dream stuff, just because the time's going fast, of the mechanics of how you encounter these same spaces and architecture within the dreamscape. So you've given us this idea that you revisit these places, although they shift, right? But it's the same place. You go to this house, it's different, but it's the same place. They're familiar. Is this, do you get a sense that you have a home, or is what's your sense with this reoccurrence of familiarity within the dreamscape? What's that about?
For me, the biggest familiarity is that I recognize that I'm dreaming.
Yes.
So, because I recognize that I'm dreaming, I begin to recognize things around me. And I begin to realize that I can influence the outcome to a certain extent. I don't like to influence the outcome too much, because what fun, there's no fun in that. There's no fun in knowing exactly, what's going to happen. But there's a great deal of fun and comfort and confidence that comes from, for me, I feel like so confident when I'm like, yeah, I fell off that cliff and then I conjured up this, carpet that flew out and caught me and set me gently down in a tree, or whatever it is. It's that, like, knowing that you're dreaming when you're dreaming, and knowing that it's okay that you are aware that you are dreaming when you're dreaming.
Yes.
If know what I mean? It's like, if you're conscious in the dream, but it's not like it breaks the spell and
Yes.
suddenly she woke up. It's not like that. It's that, it's like, if you fell down the rabbit hole and you knew it was a dream the whole time, what would you do differently? What would Alice have done differently if she had known the whole time that it was a dream? Or was it a dream?
Yeah, exactly.
That's a whole other topic.
Well, we get into that here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I actually had
Wait. That was a dream, that whole book? I never read it, so I'm serious.
Oh, yeah. Well, right at the very end. So, what happens is, in the very, very beginning of that book, her sister is reading to her and she's bored because it's a book without any picture. And so she sort of drifts off. And as she drifts off and is kind of daydreaming, they don't really say she's fallen asleep. She looks over and she sees this rabbit with a waistcoat and a watch, and he's running off after her. And she decides to chase after him because who wouldn't? What the heck? And at the very end, she sort of wakes up and then is kind of left wondering, was that a dream? Now, in the second book,
Right.
Through the Looking Glass,
Yes.
she's sort of, that's a little bit more like she knows what's going on, and she steps through the mirror.
Right. That's the story I'm thinking of. I never read the first book. Alice's Adventures, isn't it, right?
Yeah.
Adventures in Wonderland.
That's how Dodgson masked his pedophilia through the dream state.
That's one theory. I actually have several theories about that book, and it's a lot of people think that it's an allegory for sort of like a drug experience, or that it was about trying to relive the preciousness of childhood. But what's amazing about Alice in Wonderland is that it actually can serve as an allegory for many, many things, including this last summer, I just, in the interest of, honesty, I had some pretty severe health problems, and I had to navigate the healthcare system.
Oh my God.
And I had to chase the white rabbit, which was my happiness and well-being. And I had to chase that down a hole and around a corner and down into, past Tweedledee and Tweedledum, the insurance companies.
Yes.
And I started thinking, man, is Alice in Wonderland an allegory for the healthcare system? Like, wow, this is crazy. So I started realizing that it's one of those brilliant works that
universally
can actually
fits.
apply to a lot of scenarios. It can apply to severe illness. It can apply to a transformation in your life. But you can actually find these characters, the Mad Hatter. Well, that's your physician dispensing the drugs, right? Try this one. This one's sure to work.
I've been working on this theory that they're the only plots that are available that, drama, whatever, that people will pay attention to are arcs on the journey of the hero's journey in that circle. So all plots for all stories can be found along that journey. Just a snippet of it, time portion.
Yeah.
Maybe that story is universal and fits in every possible slot.
I mean, now that's one of those stories. I know this is complete other tangent, but that is one of those books that I have read probably more than any other story in my life. I read it as a child. I read it as a teenager. I read it as a young adult. I read it as an old lady. I've read it over and over again. I've read it to my son. I've read it to myself again. I've read different versions and different variations. And at every stage and every time I read it, I discover something different in it. And I certainly don't have it memorized by any means, but I'm fairly familiar with it at this point.
Scholarly.
And I think that it's, there are certain, that's just something I also find interesting in general, is that you can read the same work of fiction at different points in your life, and it can actually have a different significant impact. The other one for me is Frankenstein. Yes. I read that as a young girl and barely understood, other than, feeling really bad for the monster. And then as I have gotten older and studied more about the backstory to how the story was created and learned more about Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley and what she was doing and all of those kind of things, it's sort of changed my view of the story, or what that's, what's significant in that story. And that's something as a writer that I find is very helpful for me, and even in the writing process, is a lot of my books have short stories in them. They're not all short stories that I've written, but they're short stories that I have always gravitated toward, whether they're in Paranormal Parlor, I have horror stories. In the fairy book, I have fairy stories. In the mermaid book, there's mermaid stories, and there are a lot of classical tales and things like that. But that's totally different.
You're like a bardess.
As opposed to a bard.
As opposed to a bard. Well, I don't know if there's a female. I don't know if a bard.
I like bardess. I like that. I like that.
I have a question. Are you aware of the so-called Alice in Wonderland programming, mind control programming, CIA programs?
Well, I have. So part of the reason I had gone to that esoteric book fair is that
Mm-hmm.
I worked as an occult book editor for a number of years,
Mm-hmm.
where I worked with some fairly prominent members of the occult community on their books. And I tended to work more in the witchcraft end of things, but there certainly were several pretty extreme conspiracy theorist books manuscripts that I read and things like that. So kind of, I mean, I'm more familiar with the idea that there's mind control in general, which brings us back to that podcast that I was talking about earlier. You'd probably really like The Walk because it
We
kind
need
of
to
does
look
get
that
into
up.
that. You
I
guys should look. It's really fun.
I've already
Fun
put
one.
links into the show notes and to Nisha's personal thing. I put on my
Jerry's
podcast.
so on this stuff.
So on it. This is
No,
He's
super
it's.
producer.
I don't know if it's true. Obviously, I'm just saying that's one of the stories out there.
If it was true, we would never admit it.
Right.
Ain't that the truth?
So you'll never know.
There's too much information to actually figure out what's real anymore.
Why bother?
And
Exactly.
again, that can apply to the Alice overlay.
Everything on TV is not real to
the
me.
Alice overlay, isn't it?
It is.
That
indeed.
is. That
is.
is absolutely.
It's the magic
In your-
box. The screens hypnotize you. You know, you believe whatever's on it.
How do you fly? And so in flying in dreams, how do you experience that?
Like swimming, but in the air.
Oh, interesting. So you move your arms like that?
Yeah, like to get propelled off the ground or off the roof or whatever it is. There's some swimming involved, so I have to sort of move my arms in a motion that kind of launches me up far enough, and then it's exactly like swimming. It's like swimming underwater but in the air. And then there's always a little teensy bit of doubt that I have to quell when I take that first leap.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always just that little bit of like, remember, you can fly. This is a dream and you can fly, and then I can do it. But if I doubt it too much, I hit the ground.
Yeah, I find that so interesting within the dreamscape is that it is completely willpower, and the power of doubt, which could be applied to here too, completely puts a wrench in your tire, so to speak.
Yeah, it's like, so how can I ask you how you fly in dreams?
I've
I'm
always
assuming you fly.
flown. I do. The first time I did it, I float like a bubble. But the very first time it
Oh,
happened, I had like those tubes that you play with in the water. You know, you can get in the middle of them, but not like it's an inner tube, but for kids. I was
yep,
young.
yep,
And
yep.
that took me. I'm with a bunch of friends, and I'm in kind of like a Broomhilda little number, like pins coming from the hair. And I all of a sudden I just pop up, and I'm just cackling. It was so much fun. And from that point on, all I did was in my imagination within the dream was to view that I had that little life just thing on, and I can get up and float, and I move in a bubble, kind of like Glinda, but not quite. It's a
Oh
sphere.
my God, that's amazing.
It's fun. I love it. It never gets old. It's never. It's always a surprise because it's not necessarily at will for me at this point. I'd like it to be. I find if I just want to go somewhere, I either pop in or there's the journey aspect. And if there's the journey aspect, it's almost always in the bubble.
So for me, it's the fastest way to get from point A to point B in the dream, even if I don't know what that is.
Yes,
So I
yes.
use it as like a means of getting like up over the hill. But that, I have asked people many times if they fly in dreams. And I very presumptuously just assumed everyone flew the same way.
No.
I was totally
We
wrong.
found that out too, Varla. There's so many different ways. Although ironically, last week our friend Grimsteak Steve last week said it was like swimming for him too. Although I think
Oh,
he
yeah?
doggy paddle.
Oh, doggy paddling.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
mine's
like-
much more graceful. I just want to say.
So wait, back to some of these typical not typical, some people don't have these, but this just mechanical. things. So there's the flying, and then what about things like experiencing deep water, dark water? Do you find any of that imagery?
No, no, I don't know if I have gone swimming. It's usually in clear and beautiful, sparkling river water. Where
Oh,
where I
nice.
grew up, I grew up swimming in a river like that. Um, so that's where I swim. If I'm going to swim anywhere in a dream, that's where I'm going to swim. But that's more of a, like, recreational fun, as you might do on a hot day type swimming. It's not usually not a lot of water, like water as a conduit, or water trying to get me, down to a certain point, or having to dive down and get things. Very, very rarely
So
does water even come into
no
play.
water creatures either.
No water creatures. Not a lot of supernatural creatures. I hate to admit, but not
Oh,
a lot of supernatural creatures in my dreams. It's mostly, you know, humans, or yeah, the ghosts of humans,
yes.
and me, and animals. But normal animals like cats and stuff, and they don't even talk. Now you're
Really?
making my dreams seem boring.
No, but they're so not though. They're so not. Yeah, well, you answered that. So the animals were my next thing, just on the dream mechanics, and then also things like space. Is there a concept of space in your dream landscape?
There's a concept of space, just like the stars are there. And I have gone up and, gone swimming through the stars while I've been
Oh,
flying, but not completely into like an outer galaxy. You can usually see the land below, not real far out there. And I'm never completely surrounded by blackness and stars, ever. There's always a human element. There's
hmm.
always something kind of tethering me.
And then also, what about uh, the sleep paralysis stuff around getting in and out of your body? In particular, sleep paralysis.
I have a lot of sleep paralysis, actually.
And what does that generally like? Just a general experience.
It's me screaming at myself to wake up within the dream, because I can't get out of the dream. It's
Yes.
it's never the dream itself, it's that I'm trying to wake up, and I can, feel that I'm, it's like me just being trapped inside my own body.
Yes. Yeah, me too. You'd be surprised at how many different explanations we get around sleep paralysis, though. And for me, it's a terrifying experience. I'm screaming, trying to move my flesh. It's like I can't get fully in my body somehow.
Right, but yet you're not totally dreaming anymore, so you're not
Right.
in that dream. You're just like, "Okay, get up, move, move, move," and you won't move. And it's never like I'm in a dream and I'm like, something terrible is happening and I need to wake up and I can't. It's not ever that. It's like the time my mom told me, it's that I'm coming back into my body, that she thinks that I'm astrally projecting,
Hmm.
especially not necessarily every night, but most of the time, that I'm astrally projecting. I'm leaving my body, and there's something's not like, I became conscious before my consciousness got back into my body, or like that's kind of how she described it to me, because this has happened to me since I was a teenager. I
Yeah.
had a lot of sleep paralysis, and that was sort of her way of explaining it to me in, layman's terms, I guess. Just like, you're not back in time. You got caught. You got
Yes.
caught with your hand in the cookie jar.
Yes. You know what though? That's how I've come to deal with it as well. It's not like
It's
I
so
can't think of.
frustrating, isn't it? And
Oh, it's a little scary though, Varla, sometimes, like, I feel like, "Oh, shit, am I dead?" Like
I definitely have had that fear a couple of times of like, I actually am not going to wake up.
Right, you can't move. You can't but and then inevitably I'll wake up yelling. Like sometimes I just push through.
Oh, really? Just
Yeah.
like,
And
punching the air.
yeah. Not all, that's not common, but it has happened where it's just all of a sudden that's what's happening. So
Yeah.
okay,
So wait, I want to. I don't want to change the topic yet because I want to know like if you have any tips or tricks to get out of it because I find what works for me is to remind myself to be like I actually have to have a conversation with myself about staying calm and recognizing if I wait it out, I will wake up. And that's extremely hard to do when you're in that panic mode. You know, Jerry, you
yes.
mentioned earlier, like the panic attack, like that feeling, that sort of claustrophobic feeling that comes over you. It's that snippet of time there. And in the grand scheme of things, it's probably less than 5 seconds of your life, right? But
Yeah, yeah.
It's
man, those are the longest 5 seconds,
Lots of
you know?
nervous parts can escape in 5 seconds.
Especially when you're trapped in a shoe.
I
yes.
was in a boardroom. I was actually in a boardroom at eBay.
Oh, wow.
There's a longer story behind this.
Jerry, you just dropped that. I love that.
It's true.
My nose is so stopped up. I know I sound crazy. So, all right, before we get to questions and stuff, I want to this could go on and on. I want to get your
Go ahead.
ideas. We can always just go on and on. So, what are your ideas on where's the line between waking and all these other states of consciousness? And as we know, dreams are as tangible as memories, which we seem to think is real. But for some, like our memories in our
Right.
life seem to have like
Right.
more weight.
Collectively, we dismiss dreams as being imaginary, but we accept memories as being real, right? Like
Yes,
collectively as a society, we've
yes.
decided that.
So
Boy,
what's real?
I have pretty blurry lines. I gotta, I gotta be
Yeah.
honest. My lines are pretty blurry. I mean, I don't really know. I don't know. I mean, obviously, I know that when I'm asleep, I'm having these, specific type of experiences and dreams. But at the same time, and especially, I think observing my son, and I see his daydreaminess quality, and I remember that quality in myself. Um, it's that this is something actually that I have contemplated a lot because there's something very dreamlike and amazing that happens when you are lost in a story.
Mm,
And if you are lost in a fairy tale and you are hearing this tale of, this tiny little creature that lived underneath a rock and would come out, 3 times a day and set out a little prize or whatever this little story is that's unfolding. During that time that you're listening to it, you're not sitting there going, there's no way a little thing could come out from under a rock. You're listening to the story and you're accepting it, and your imagination is kind of conjuring the pictures, and you're lost in that story. And that right there is the kingdom of fairy.
mm.
That is the power of the fairy tale and the power of the suspension of disbelief
Yes.
that anyone who is interested in, the magical arts or the fairy tales or magical creatures or any of these things, we all have that. And some of this stuff just sounds really pretend, or the paranormal or dreams. I mean, all of those things, there's this commonality when you actually are able to suspend your doubt long enough. And I think that that moment can happen frequently. And that is the same moment that is happening in your dreams. And it can be extremely cathartic and extremely inspiring. This is why, if you want to write something, you should read a lot, because you will begin to understand the significance. Not that you want to mimic a writer that you admire, but that, which I know a lot of writers say they're afraid of, but that you are able to recognize the power of the story and therefore your own ability to create that, and how significant that is, that you're not just telling a little fairy tale, that your words are important and the images you create are important, and even if only one person reads them, that it might change. My mom used to just make stories up. She doesn't even remember half of them, but those little things that she would tell us, then we would all have to conspire and say, no, Mom, that's not what happened next, because she would tell it to generation after generation. And we've encouraged her to write those things down, then she'll forget that she even created this incredible story. And I think that it's something that has come up for me, especially in the last few years, as I worked on this fairy puka changeling book, where I read a lot of fairy and folklore, a lot, way more than I had ever read in my life. And I grew up reading it, and all different manner, things that were said to be nonfiction, things that were fiction. And I just really came to the understanding over and over again. And it happened a lot with the mermaid book. People would say to me, okay, but come on, mermaids aren't real, right? Those are the ones that aren't real. We'll accept Bigfoot, but we're not going to accept mermaids. Please, please. Mermaids are way more plausible, right? I don't know. They're probably equally plausible. But I think what we dismiss and what we forget about with myth and what we call myth, we sort of associate that with a lie or a mistruth, but that is not necessarily what a myth is. A myth is a retelling of something. A myth is a story that teaches you something. And when you have that, there's just so much cultural significance in telling those stories and being lost in those stories. And I really do think that it psychologically does positive things to us. And it allows us to then think, okay, if that was possible in that story, then this is possible in my life. And it actually allows us to make positive changes in our lives. And I really, obviously, very passionately believe that, because I just went off on it.
That's good. Thank you. Oh, tell us more.
I'm watching the clock now.
No, there's no time limit at all. I do have a question, or a series of questions. So you were talking about your mermaid book and your other books, and have you experienced a lot of any abnormal things, synchronicities, etc., during the writing of the books, in reference to the material?
Yes, I have. In fact, I had hobgoblins steal an entire chapter from me.
Really?
Oh,
Was it their
wow.
chapter?
Yes, it was their chapter. The little pricks.
That's what they do.
No, I was working on the fairy manuscript. It was very late at night, and I was, 2 days past my deadline.
Mhm.
So I was really sweating bullets to try and make sure that everything was the way that I wanted it. And I the manuscript was ready, but I started tweaking with it because I had stumbled upon this whole rabbit warren of hobgoblins and goblins and dwarves, and I thought, I didn't put enough dwarves in here. That led me to Tommy knockers, and that led me to leprechaun. And so I was just kind of trying to just make sure I got everything in there. And I sort of had this beautiful thing written about hobgoblins, and the sort of hobgoblins being these sort of house brownie, this significant, I think they're brownies in Wales, and they're hobgoblins in parts of England, and they're
Dobie
in Ireland, and Adobe in Scotland. Yes, and they're called different things, but they're these sort of domestic fairy elf-like creatures, and they can be very helpful, and they can also be very tricky. So if you don't properly acknowledge them, feed them, give them the things that they need, like wine and cake, which everybody needs.
Cheers.
They'll use their magic against you instead of helping.
So in any case, I had sort of, put this section about hobgoblins. I was so proud of myself because I felt, oh, I got this in. I got it exactly the way I wanted it. And tomorrow I will send this in. And so tomorrow came and I looked through the manuscript and I was pretty proud of, what I had done and that I felt like I'd put in the things that I wanted. And then I got to that chapter and I couldn't find the chapter that I had, written in the wee hours of the morning. So I'm uh, you know, I'm not a novice when it comes to Microsoft Word.
Right.
I've been using it probably since it was first invented, and it's my main, as a writer, I'm in it every day. I know I watch the tutorials, I know all the tricks. So I try everything. I even go to the Google and I ask the Google what to do if you can't find this section. Because I'm thinking I must have just like copied and pasted right over it or something and moved it around. I mean,
Right.
obviously, right? Long story short, at a certain point, now it's 2 o'clock on the day that I'm, 2 days late, and I swore I would have it in by 5 o'clock Eastern time, and I'm just like, oh man, I just have to rewrite it. And so there is a section on hobgoblins in there, but it is not exactly the section that it was to begin with. And I knew when I couldn't find it, I just thought, all right, well, that's, they're showing me.
Right.
So,
But no, it's a good story. Do you know Joshua Cutchin? He wrote,
no.
what was his book? The Brimstone Deceit was the one about smells and fairy smells, but his latest one was about fairy abductions. I think it's called Thieves in the Night.
Ooh, that sounds good.
Yes.
Yeah, he's really interesting, and he compares a lot of that to what people, UFO abductees.
Alien abductions.
Yeah.
Totally
Yes.
have had that thought myself.
Yeah.
When reading the descriptions of some of these like goblin-y things and their big old eyes and just the whole idea, like I said at the very beginning, I told you my mother warned me never to fall asleep on the fairy mound.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Because what happens? You wake up, you've lost all sense of time, you've probably lost your clothing.
Yes.
You have no idea what's gone on, and you just have these vague memories of something happening. Now, people, when they recall the fairy kingdom, they do recall quite a bit of, food and drink and revelry that leads to the wasting away.
His first book was called A Trojan Feast, about the
really?
about
I've never heard of
fairies.
that.
Yeah.
We've had him on here. It was a great show.
And he had a really interesting synchronicity with his book writing and Fairy Queen.
Oh yeah.
I think
that
he
was
did,
good.
but yeah.
Don't fuck with the fairies, I guess.
No.
It's interesting why you guys are
the
talking
moral of the story.
about the goblins. I always have a candle going before I start the show, and of course I'm a witch, and I get all ready. And when you're good, the candle's steady this whole time, you start talking about the goblins, and it just went crazy. It just went crazy.
Really?
Yeah,
I
and
always
burnt
have
down
candles.
halfway through.
Oh, that's funny. My candle is okay right now, but I never do an interview without candles. Even, I mean, I know no one can see me, but I can feel me, and I need the candles.
It's very it's the element there, so I'm always calling in the being of fire. But this candle went halfway down. It's all waxy and crazy. It's the first time doing these shows. And what subject? The goblins, the house goblins.
House goblins. Yeah.
I'm gonna make sure mine gets chocolate and beer later.
The other, chocolate and beer, that works too. The other kind of correlation with that, since we're mentioning it, is the like poltergeist.
Yes.
And people saying that they wake up with scratches and they've been pinched and they have bruises in their body and things like that. And there are a number of imps that like to pinch children in the night and horrible things like that. So
this is why.
But also I think that a lot of that some instances can be manifestations of thought, of energy and thoughts.
Agree, 100% agree.
Yeah.
By people who, for a variety of reasons.
Correct.
For a variety, maybe it's a
hormonal thing,
Lots of reasons, and there's been a lot of talk about, why poltergeists in particular are attracted to like teenagers. It seems to be the highest number of reports are teenagers. But I do think that when I was reading, and I'm not talking about like, I'm not even talking about the Grimm's fairy tales or these I am talking about like weird old things that are written in English but sound like they're written in Welsh, and things that
Mm.
where you really have to like read between the lines and dig through stuff. And that's where I really started seeing a lot of those connections with things that might be associated with a haunting or an alien abduction.
Hmm.
It was in the real good old stuff that's, hidden. And that stuff isn't even 100% authentic because it's written.
Right.
It's a written oral tradition.
And the shit on
So,
TV is all staged, so.
yeah, well, have you ever been able to, I mean, the idea that you can walk into a haunted place and command an entity to, you know, answer you or you're gonna punch it, like that's just
We talked to
pretty outrageous.
our guest a few weeks ago is a ghost hunter in that ilk, and but she's for real. And we were talking about that and how she also thinks that it could be the people in the room who want that to happen are psychically projecting that onto the recorder, onto those EVP recorders.
Are you talking about MJ?
Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have my experience with the Ouija board in particular, I think totally supports that you can kind of manifest those strange and unusual things to happen if you are if you have the wrong kind of energy and you're kind of projecting that stuff. I do think that can happen.
I don't know if
But
it has to be wrong kind of energy. If you can project your energy in enough.
Yeah, maybe wrong. Not maybe wrong is I don't know. I mean, I think it's kind of rude.
They might. I don't think they know they're doing it.
Well, they don't know that they're doing the projection of the energy, but they're doing the rude behavior that's leading to that energy.
Oh yeah, totally. They are ghost abusers.
Ghost abusers. I mean, and I know a lot of totally legit, awesome ghost hunters, and they are the ones that will tell you, God, it would be great if everything was like it was on TV, but that's the edited version. There's 22 hours of footage of us and creaking floorboards.
Right. Haven't locked Aaron in a dark room for 3 hours. Sorry, did I say that out loud?
Jerry's Tourette's.
Hey, it's been good lately.
Actually, it has been. So, do you, in the end, and all that, what makes this seem more significant? This waking life, this nowness, as opposed to anything else, all these other states of consciousness that we have access to and clearly inhabit. But for some reason, there's a gravity here that seems more sensate in the nowness.
Well, it's longer, for one thing. I mean, the consciousness, your conscious waking hours are longer, minute-wise, than your dream state, unless you are like in a dream coma or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's part of it. And when you are dreaming, do you dream of waking life? No, you're in the dreamscape. You're like, yeah, I can fly, and like, let's go see so and so. Or when you're awake, you are always trying to get back to that dreamscape. I mean, if you're a dreamer.
Yes.
And I know I'm not the only one.
You're good one.
Thank you. But so I don't know. I mean, it's probably that in the conscious world, we actually can choose or are able to access these other worlds and to contemplate them and to think about them. And so that becomes the overarching, dominant us, right? Like, this is daytime me, this is, or nighttime me, but this is the main me. And then there's dream me. That doesn't mean we like main me more than we like dream me, or that, we want to be in dream state all the time. I also think that, dream state is sort of nonsensical for a reason, so that you can see the things that are meant to make sense. If everything was
Mhm.
real normal in your dream, then, that would be okay, well, there's your message. But if your dream state is like, oh, yeah, I'm just walking through this field and then this apple falls on my head and then I open a door and then suddenly there's a castle and a moat, then the thing that seems the most normal in that is going to be your takeaway. But I
Right.
think we are we will never understand it, and because we'll never understand it, we're going to spend our waking lives trying to understand it, and
What
then
so okay, so let me go here real fast. Say so the things that on this exact path we are, the things in the dreamscape, it's so fantastical, and a lot of times those things that are fantastical actually are my cues for lucidity. Oh, here I am. I'm dreaming, and then I get on with what's going on. What about now, Varla, if we look at the world around us, that's around us right now, and how crazy things are, like just the weather, and not even the craziness of the political scene or all the other stuff that seems to
by
be going.
whatever do you mean?
I know. So exactly, Alice. So the queen, that's the queen. What do you think is all of the craziness going on in our current waking life really has been ever the nature of reality? Things are so
Right, like, can this
accurate.
possibly be real? Is this really happening?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I feel the same. I feel that there's a certain element of, are we in a Simpsons episode? Is that actually what's happening right now? Because it really feels like this is a Simpsons episode. Not this show, but
The whole thing,
United
the whole
States
of it.
in
Yes.
2019, whatever year we're in. And I guess, yeah, I mean, that's absolutely, it's hard to know because it seems so unreal, but I think that that's also, it's like the solution is also the problem, because the inability to accept that, these things have consequences and a reality are feeding this environment that is becoming surreal. Things are, eh,
Yes.
I've lived in Minnesota now. This is my, I count it by the winters. This is my fourth
Yes.
winter, and they've all been different, very different. Um, they've all been cold by California standards,
Yes.
but they've been different, and they've been warmer, and the summers have been hotter, and there's a, like, it's like we're right in the middle of some extreme climate change. It's not, oh, it's coming, and it's not, oh, we're in the flood zone. It's like, here we are, we're right in the middle of it. That is what's happening. We are in the middle of major, major shift. And I don't know. I mean, with that shift comes, I'm an optimist. So I believe that with that shift comes an awakening. And I think that that's certainly true. I don't, I'm not talking about politically specifically, but that's an excellent example that there are many people that were complacent for many years and now see that they must fight because it's the only way out. Or there are people that are, from whatever your point of view is. I just think there's apathy, and apathy doesn't get you solutions. And so unfortunately you have to, as humans, we have to undergo, like, it has to be in our face, like literally in our face for us to do anything about it. And so this is a bit more of an esoteric in our face because it's global and it's
Yes.
environmental and it's
Yes.
a little bit more, it's far reaching. And I think,
It's more
um,
representative to what's going on.
yes, it's like, Well, we talked earlier about, we were kind of talking about psychic abilities and closing yourself off to some of these distractions and how we have everything. We have this surreal world that we operate in. Like, we are all technically, like, we can see each other. Other people out there can hear our voices. We're having these conversations, but we're not, like, we can't touch each other. We're not actually real. We're not
Right.
actually real to each other.
Right.
And I think about this a lot because so in the paranormal parlor book that I wrote, I talk a lot about this kind of period of time of the rise of spiritualism in the United States, and how that became basically, it was the idea that you could commune with the dead and that the dead had messages for us. So it wasn't just that you could talk to the dead. It was like you started using spirit boards, and the everyday person through a psychic medium could get these important messages. And we still see, practices like, regular tarot readings and things like that. Now, tarot has a much longer history, but the rise in popularity in the United States especially happened like post Civil War to about 1920. And I think about how, you've got people who they've lost somebody that they love, so they're in this dire circumstance and they're wanting to know if they're okay. And so okay, now you've got this, your dead husband or the dead soldier. And at the same time as spiritualism is on the rise, and there are people putting their hands and moving a planchet around and saying that this is the ghost of, Johnny, you've got the telephone, a
Mm.
disembodied voice appearing in your, you're going like steamer ship to telegram, Morse code to a phone call, where, this voice is suddenly appearing. And it's that kind of overlap of where technology comes into play and how that affects people's spirituality. And we're almost like a complete opposite of that now, where we have so much technology that we are now accepting things that aren't real as real because we saw it on the internet,
Like
right?
China landing on the dark side of the moon?
The fake news. Yeah.
Yeah, I concur.
Well, it's putting us that way, right, Jerry, where we have to question everything now.
Yeah, right, because we can't tell if stuff is CGI or not anymore, especially for something we've never seen with our real eyes, with our own eyes, like space.
Right. And so the optimist in me is saying that it is a wake up call and it's an awakening. And I think it's a rallying cry for people to do things that are more I don't know. It's like just to reconnect, or it's a rallying cry to do the right thing and to, combat the hatred with compassion and love, and to, just change your thinking and change your lifestyle um, for the better, and be more conscious. And it's something that, of course, there have been people who've been saying this for years and years and years. It's like, we're stop using plastic bags, we're gonna run out of oil, like all these kinds of things. But now that we're more on the precipice, it's not even so much of like an ecological issue. It's a whole other kind of a whole other level of it. So thankfully we have, the dream sanctuary to go to, where these things are not weighing heavily upon us. Hopefully everybody dreams differently.
Oh, I don't worry about it.
But when I dream, I am, really, really happy to be dreaming.
Yes, as am I. Every time I realize within the dream that when that moment, always that moment when it's like I'm dreaming, that lucid moment, I there's just this amazing, energetic, almost like supernova that happens internally for me. It's like this is it's a cue to know that there's so much more.
Yes, absolutely. And that well, exactly. And I think it can be, as crazy as things might seem. In For perspective, let's go back to the invention of the telephone. How crazy was that for people? Like that was the Industrial Revolution was a totally crazy time. We have hindsight to go back and say, oh, this was the dawn of blah, blah, blah. This is how, we started producing, mass clothing and things like that. And there were a lot of positives. Hey, the children don't have to work in the sweatshop anymore. This is great. The kids don't have to get covered in soot and have their fingers bleeding. We can have a machine do it and the women can do all the work. But
there was also that fear, Varla, that it was going to take those, that what are, that's the Industrial Revolution, when all this is coming in and it's going to save us from some of the drudge work. Yet
Right.
it was also, there's an unstable aspect because the drudge work we were doing also, and it was part of how, certain levels of society got by doing that. They needed those jobs.
That was the foot in the door for indoctrination.
Yeah. And I think, but I guess my point is that people, who are feeling like, wow, this is just an insane time, not invalidating those feelings, but that is an experience that we as humanity have experienced over and over again as we've gone through major change.
Yes.
Don't you feel though we've been in quite a lull for a while?
What, that we've just been like hanging out and it's all good?
The future never came. We don't have it. Seriously, we haven't had any new tech since the iPhone came out. If you want to be honest. We've had
Isn't there like a secret hovercraft or there's a self-driving car which crashes.
So
it's just like a person might as well drive it.
It's like a drunk person driving. So
yeah, it's like a drunk driver.
It can only be used in Louisiana.
It's all secret technology. No, I mean maybe we're at maybe we've just peaked, because I personally have noticed more of a trend, especially in some of the younger, my younger nieces and nephews, where they're actually less obsessed with technology and being online and being connected and posting images all the time on Instagram and showing this curated life that doesn't exist.
Yeah, it was.
It's
the kids that came after my kids are the ones.
Yeah,
like that.
It's the middle. It's we middles, like we're the ones who weren't born into it. We're the ones who are so obsessed with it because it's still new to us.
Well, I'm older than you. I'm not obsessed with it.
Oh yeah.
I push
but you rely on it.
I think I'm older than you.
We need it. We all rely on it to some extent. Yeah. Look at us here.
No, right. That's what I mean. We rely on it for certain, I think I had said to you, it was before the interview started, that as an introvert author, I must at least maintain one social media profile or I will never sell a damn book. Because if I won't go on Twitter and I won't go on the Instagram and I was like,
if you're not on Instagram, you can't
barely maintain my website. So it's
girl.
And if you're not on Instagram, you can't get into Congress these days. So
oh man.
I thought that was Twitter.
No, now it's Instagram.
It's always this shifting tide.
But Instagram is a Facebook thing, isn't it?
Instagram is owned by Facebook, yes.
Is it really? I didn't know that.
I didn't know that until recently, and I was like, oh, womp womp.
I think I might leave now.
All right. It's late.
Yes. Did you get any questions from the
I did, but I think she answered them all.
Okay, cool.
Intuitively, psychically?
That's usually how it happens, actually.
Yeah, pretty much. Cool. All right.
So then it's just a matter of telling us what you've got.
It's your plug time.
I got nothing.
Got pumpkin. I got pumpkins.
I said it all. Yeah.
I remember a question. Did you grow up near or around Eden Prairie, Minnesota?
No, we got that earlier. Remember the Bay Area?
I grew up in the Bay Area.
Now, are you living now?
I live near St. Paul, so Eden Prairie is, I think, a little bit south of Minneapolis.
It's south.
I don't. Someone asked.
Yeah.
Why are they stalking me?
It's
I know.
just,
See,
it's
this is
just
the
a.
thing. You don't, girl, don't give away
I'm not going to give you my
I
address.
told him I don't want your address. It's a cult fan. It's cool.
Yeah, totally. Now, I know where it is, if that helps.
I don't know. He said it was some kind of weird synchro.
I worked in Shakopee.
Shit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, ask
So,
you about the Lion's Tap.
I don't know. What? Who
Oh.
said that?
A cult fan.
Oh, I don't know what that means.
He wants.
That's a
I
bar.
want her to eat at the Lion's Tap. You need to eat at the
Yeah.
Lion's Tap.
Oh, it's a recommendation. Oh,
restaurant,
thank
yeah.
you. Oh, that's delightful.
Down
Okay.
in Faribault.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fairmont,
Look at
Fairmont.
I'm writing that down actually because I'm still fairly new to the area. So
Yeah, this in Faribault.
Yeah, Darcy wants to know if your real name is Varla Ventura.
yep.
It is now.
Okay, so what's coming? Where can people find you, and what do you have in the work and all that? You mentioned this latest book coming out.
Oh yes. So my website is varlaventura.net, just my name.net. And I have it's been out for about I don't know what month is it? It's been out for about 6 months now. I have Varla Ventura's Paranormal Parlor, Ghost
Love that.
Seances, and Tales of True Hauntings. And that is my most recent book. I really I really like this book. Not that I don't like my other books, but they're my other books. They're like they were fine, but this book is a book that I actually wanted to write years and years ago. This is the book that I would have written, out the gate if I had all the knowledge and the publishing contacts that I now have. So it's something that I'm just proud of because it includes a lot more personal stories. It has stories from some of my favorite people in the paranormal community. It talks a lot about women in the paranormal, which could probably be a book in and of itself. And so I'm quite proud of it, and it turned out really beautifully. And that's my most recent book. And then I have, right prior to that, I did Fairies, Pukas, and Changelings, a complete guide to the wild and wicked enchanted realm. And then I have several other books. I have two books I have the Book of the Bizarre and Beyond Bizarre, and I have Banshees, Werewolves, and Vampires, and Among the Mermaids. Those are kind of my main books that I have written in the last few years / actually get royalties on.
Awesome. All the cool stuff too.
Those are the ones that yeah, those are the ones, those last two especially. So I have a couple. I mean, my kind of my downtime right now, I do a lot of stuff around in the fall. I have a couple of other interviews coming up. I post those on my website, just radio interviews and known appearances. And I don't have really another book to plug yet. It's in the works, so we'll see what 2019 holds.
Sweet.
Excellent.
I put links to all those places you mentioned in the show notes and also in the description of this video. So if anyone wants to track it down,
Thank you for doing that.
You're no problem. Before I forget, you were talking about how technology versus spirituality and all that. How other people aren't real and they don't matter and whatnot. I said,
well, that's an interesting summary.
Well, that's what you said. I mean, that's what you were talking about. Remember, it was about 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, I remember.
Okay,
yes, it's just the way in which you recap that, Jerry.
I'm sorry.
Funny.
It was succinct.
Yeah.
It sounds cold. It is not the way it came off.
No,
I'm not empathetic for people I don't know. In the video, I'm not for you. Oh my God, I got myself hold. All right, what I'm saying, the link I put in chat and also into the live chat and also in the show notes is a clip I pulled out of a TV show called Legion that was on last year.
Okay.
Genius. It's so genius.
Really interesting show, and they have these little educational segments, and the one from the last episode was called Other People Don't Matter, and it basically illustrates exactly what you're talking about.
Oh,
it's genius, Varla. It's so good. It's actually from DC?
It was a DC comic book.
Yeah.
Marvel. It's Marvel. Marvel.
marvelous. And the series is absolutely brilliant.
It's
Really,
like
really
Professor X's kid, I think, is the father.
Okay, cool. This is the link that you sent me that says, please save this link, Varla.
Yeah, watch
I copied
that.
into a note so that I would not lose it.
There's 5 or 6 other ones on my YouTube channel.
Okay.
That one, for whatever reason, YouTube would not let me put that up on my channel. It let me put the other ones.
Oh, okay.
So
Well, that makes me want to watch it even more if YouTube doesn't allow it.
It was the last one, and it kind
Getting late.
the other the other 6 don't really lead up to it, but there's a crescendo.
Okay.
Alrighty.
Cool.
So thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great chat.
This has been
And so awesome.
Thank you.
So fun. Thank you both for having me, for all the thoughtful questions, and really an interesting, from the interviewee's point of view, really interesting. Definitely a lot of food for thought for me. There's a couple things that I'm still not sure about.
Well, we got more.
Well,
so
I wonder what I'm going to dream tonight.
Yeah, if it's interesting, please let us know. I'll put it in the notes too. So thank you, Varla. Thank you, Nish. Thank you, people who are listening live and who are in chat, everyone out there. And we'll see you next week. Oh, our guest next week is, help me out, Devin Maggi.
Oh, yes. That's going to be interesting.
YouTube channel is Flat Earth Paradise. Went around as Hermes for a while. Cool dude. Be awesome chat. All right, everyone. Take care. We'll see you next week.
All right.